Hi, I'm Kelsey from Coaching with Kelsey, and today we're going to talk about meta emotions. Let me start by explaining what a meta emotion is. It's when we have a feeling about a feeling we've had. There are a lot of different examples of how meta emotions can show up in our lives, but I'm going to focus on one example today, and that example is the emotion of judgment and then the meta emotion of self-judgment of our judgment. I'm going to kind of break down what I see as the pattern, and then we're going to unpack it even further to see what happens at each step so that we can understand why this is a cycle we get stuck in. It starts with a judgment, okay? So we have a judgment on someone else, okay? A thought runs through our head, and then because we have perhaps picked up and learned things along the way in our lives, we see that that judgment was problematic. Instead of leaving it there, we then self-judge our judgment, right? We're like, I cannot believe that you just had that thought. It's like you haven't even made any progress. And then here's what happens after that. We self-judge our self-judgment. Oh my God, I'm doing it again. I can't believe that I can't release this habit of self-judging myself. I know it's not good for me. Why? Why am I this way? Right? So we want to get out of this cycle. But how? Right? That's what goes through our mind when we get to that three emotions deep self-judgment of self-judgment. I don't want to do this anymore. Why can't I stop? And so now we're going to break down what happens at each step and why it is that we need to understand this process if we want to move away from it. So let's start with judgment. I see judgment, the first step, as being the learned behavior, the learned thought, the learned feeling. What is it that attracts us to judgment of others? I think that, at least in my experience, my own personal analysis of my experience of judgment, is that it gives us a brief ego boost, an emotional high, because in that moment, we're not just thinking there's something wrong with that person, we're thinking I am better than that person. You may have already noticed that is where the self-judgment slips in first, right? The idea that we think we might be better than someone else doesn't sit well usually. It doesn't feel very good when we analyze it, right? And so, because we are taught that when we are doing something we don't want to do, we're not achieving what we want to achieve, that we need to be hard on ourselves. And if we're hard on ourselves, then we will make a change. That's what we're taught, right? So notice how that is a competing concept even, because that means that in order to fix ourselves, we must judge ourselves. See how the judgment is already mixed in to the way we were taught to create change in ourselves, in our lives. And so we do what we've learned and we move into the next stage, which is self-judgment, okay? So I've already just talked about how we learn self-judgment as a technique for correcting behavior, right? And it also, however, works as a block to curiosity, okay? And what I mean by that is when we have self-judgment, we are raising walls up against the idea of saying to ourselves, I wonder why I had that thought. What does it mean that I had that thought? Do I want to have that thought? What is another thought that I could have that I choose, right? So none of that questioning that has no judgment. Notice curiosity is without judgment. It's just curious. None of that gets to happen when we move into this habit of self-judgment. And here is where more self-judgment swings on in, okay? So now we're at the third layer of the meta-emotion experience. We are having self-judgment about our self-judgment. Why does this happen? It happens because we have likely sort of started to understand this process isn't working for us, that we don't like it, and we want to change it. But we also still have this habit of using judgment to mold and shape ourselves into the person we want to be, which is not sustainable. And so when we see the self-judgment now, we are judging the self-judgment because we want to change that. So notice, we have the judgment, we want to change it, so we self-judge. We have the self-judgment, we want to change it, so we self-judge the self-judgment. This is the cycle that never ends. So let's focus on this stage really quick and what happens in the aftermath of that leads to the same patterned behavior happening again and again and again, okay? So when we get to this is for all self-judgment, but especially when we're packing it like layers deep, right? It brings about shame. Shame makes us want to hide. And when we hide, we, again, blocking curiosity. We do not want to look at or ask questions about the behavior because we're so uncomfortable with it. And why are we uncomfortable with it? Because we think it means something about who we are as a person. I don't know if you've heard this before, but it's like the difference between shame and guilt. Shame says I am a bad person, and guilt says I have done something bad. And this applies, right? We have a judgment and we don't like being judgmental. It's something we want to shift and change about ourselves. And so instead, at the end of the cycle of thinking, the judgment I had was something I don't like and is something bad, we say, I am this. I am bad. Can you see the way that, like, I want you to imagine you're talking to a child, right? And you are saying these things to a child. It would make complete sense for that child to not make a shift or a change, because what they're learning is that there's something wrong with them. And once you believe there's something wrong with you, you stop believing in your capacity to make a change in yourself. It feels like this is just how it is, who I am, and you sort of resign yourself to that. So how do we end the cycle, or at least start the process of shifting the cycle to something else? I really think the first step is everything we're talking about. We need to understand what's happening in our brains, and that it's a normal, natural process of unlearning something, to go through these phases where we are having the thought, we're having the self-judgment, we're having the self-judgment about the self-judgment, and then after, we have to reflect on it, right? So maybe in the beginning, you have the experience, and then a couple of hours later or days later, you can reflect back on it and analyze it and be curious with it, because you're not in such a close emotional space with it, right? So it starts there, and then the more you practice that, the more you can pause that in the middle, right? You can have the judgment, and then you start to have the self-judgment about the judgment, and you stop it there. You're like, whoa, I see what's happening as it's happening now, right? And so the stage after that is the stage where we start to have the judgment, and we're like, nope, that's not actually what I think and believe. But we have to go through these phases. And I think we often get stuck by telling ourselves we should be further ahead than we are. It's not true. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. And understanding the process of how this works and the process of unlearning is going to help you immensely with making this change that's so important to you. But it requires curiosity and self-compassion all the way through. Thank you so much for watching this, and I'm so glad to be able to share this information with you because it has helped me so much in my experience. If this does resonate with you and you want to learn more about it, consider signing up for a free consultation. We can talk and get to know each other a little bit. You can tell me about what's been going on with you, what do you want to work on, and I can tell you what I teach and more about my program. It's honestly a lot of fun, even if you don't sign up for the program in the end. So just consider it. But thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.